So he shot her, she went down, and then he turned his gun on me.
911, what's your emergency?
The first couple minutes of a medical emergency is the time that counts.
There's lots of people down. There's blood everywhere.
Most people who are injured, they don't die from the injury itself, but they die from the bleeding.
Please hurry!
All right, sir, hang in there. We have units en route.
You know how to stop the bleeding. Everything else we can fix later, but if you don't stop the bleeding, you're going to lose their life.
Bravo unit responding. We're 8 minutes out.
8 minutes. In the U.S., that's the national average for emergency response. But a person can bleed to death in 6 minutes or less. Most of what we know about treating trauma wounds has been hard learned on the battlefield. From Rome's legions to World War II's Band of Brothers, through the Vietnam conflict, the bandage was the primary tool to immediately treat bleeding wounds. Yet, over all that time, remarkably, that same bandage had not really changed. It wasn't until the 1980s that a young American named Bernard Barnatan immigrated to Israel and came up with a better solution.
While he was in the military, he was trying to be a medic, and he saw what was used by soldiers then, which was a bandage that was the same one that was used in the Second World War, and thought about how it could be better, and he came up with an idea, a pressure bar that applied the pressure on the bandage as you were using it around the wound. The way we were trained was to use another object, like a stone, another bandage, or a piece of wood to apply some pressure. And that idea of having the bandage itself do what before we had something else do it was very simple, but it was, wow, you know, how come nobody thought about this before?
For me, the story of the Israeli bandage is a pretty fascinating one because I was a Special Forces medic before it was invented. So I was doing all the things myself that the bandage does. I was having my trauma dressing, having my ACE wrap, having a little windlass to add some extra pressure, and the first time I really saw the Israeli bandage in action is in Afghanistan, late 2003. One of my medics brought in a wounded guy that he had saved, and we were getting him ready for the medical evacuation. I'm like, what's that? Because it caught my eye. It was a different dressing than I had seen before, and he showed me what the dressing was, and I was like, my God, it's brilliant invention. It's so simple. It's taking 3 base things that are our bread and butter for saving lives and putting them all in one kit.
Just the engineering of it, the simplicity of it. They can look at this and go, okay, this big white thing, yeah, that goes on the boo-boo. And then I take the other thing and I wrap it around it. They don't know the nomenclature, but they can figure it out.
Anyone can use it without any training because as soon as you open it up, you see the dressing goes on the wound. You've got your pressure bar. You've got a little handle that you can either use for self-application or for a stronger anchor point. You can tighten it down, stop the bleeding, and then you can be hands-free so you can go about the other business of either saving their life or saving someone else's life if it's a mass casualty scenario. So it just gives you so much more power, control, freedom, speed, and speed is everything when it comes to saving lives.
I fell in love with it when I saw it. And I liked the guy that was behind it, you know, his compassion for what he was doing. And I kind of got hooked, you know, into the story and into what it could do and the simplicity on one hand, but the importance of it on the other. Immediately we knew that it had a great idea.
The emergency bandage was quickly adopted by the military and nicknamed the Israeli bandage. It was an innovative tool for a new way of thinking about battlefield wound response. Stop the bleeding first, even before a medic arrives on the scene.
Following the Vietnam War, they found out that 8 out of 10 deaths could have been prevented. In other words, the injuries themselves were not injuries that would cause death. Bleeding is the #1 cause of death from injuries, and it's the easiest thing to treat.
To stop a bleed as early as possible increases a person's chance of survival exponentially.
You don't have to be a surgeon, You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a medic.
Our field medical units move with the combat troops they support.
In the old days, the John Wayne movies, a soldier would fall down and cry, "Medic!" and the medic would run to help them. And that philosophy changed over time to not asking somebody else to take care of you, but take care of yourself. And having one soldier help another, not necessarily being a medic.
9/11 jolted America and the world. We went to war. The Israeli Bandage was issued to every U.S. soldier. After serving their country, many of these soldiers returned home to join law enforcement and become emergency responders, bringing their skills and the bandage with them.
These guys that came back, they saw the bandage in the field and they brought it to the civilian world to have it.
We really started gaining traction for the program in law enforcement in about 2008. I was working in EMS, been showing them to EMTs, paramedics, and realizing the potential of this to replace so many other components that I was carrying. What caused me to keep going and pushing and always striving more was the fact that I knew that officers needed this training. And knowing that one day, one officer that I trained would make a difference.
My name is Ron Barber, former member of Congress, formerly district director to Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. What I remember is out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shooter coming around behind us with the gun held in two hands and lunged towards Gabby. So he shot her, she went down, and then he turned his gun on me. I could hear the pop, 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 pop of the bullets.
It was utter mayhem outside the Northwest Safeway in the hours that followed the mass shooting. But in the moments right after victims went down, deputies describe it as silent chaos.
So as I was lying there, I didn't realize that I'd been shot, actually. Once when I saw the pool of blood around my leg, I realized I'd been injured. I got a shot to the face and one to my leg, which severed the femoral vein. There was a woman who came out of the Safeway and put her hands on my wound to try to suppress the bleeding. I was in and out of, sort of fading in and out because I was losing blood pressure pretty significantly.
In the minutes deputies waited for paramedics to arrive, they scoped out the situation and used the emergency training they received just months earlier. At their disposal, a kit with scissors, bandage, gauze.
What I saw was horrific, to say the least. I saw Gabby lying on her side, facing away from me. I could tell she was still breathing. I could see the shallow breathing. Fortunately, what happened was the woman who was helping with the bleeding was relieved, and I was able to get the Israeli bandage on my wound, on my left leg.
You guys arrived 5 or 6 minutes before paramedics arrived. Tell us what you did during that time.
I treated people who needed medical treatment. I used the combat gauze. I used the Israeli bandage on the patients that I dealt with.
I can see his face today. Bald, shaved head, sunglasses up on his head, looking at me, "You're going to be okay, you're going to be okay."
They were only on scene for about 5 minutes before paramedics got there. But the work these deputies did helped keep so many people alive.
There were two reasons that I'm still here today talking to you about what happened. One is the quick response from a woman in the Safeway who came out and at least tried to stop the bleeding, although not very successfully with her bare hands. And that bandage. We're so fortunate that that bandage was in the emergency kit for the Sheriff's Department, because without it, I know I would be dead.
If there's a single police officer in the state or in the country that doesn't have equipment, doesn't have training, then we need to reach out to that officer. Because that might be the officer that shows up the day that you're hit by the drunk and you're pinned in the car and goes, "Hey, I know what fixes this. Let me grab this thing out of my pack."
Prior to 9/11, other high-profile acts of violence had already shaken American society. The assassination of a president, the bombing of a federal building in Oklahoma City, and the school shooting at Columbine. But 9/11 had a transformative effect on all of us. We felt vulnerable, endangered by a struggle without end or front lines.
The Boston Marathon was another milestone where people, they're just bystanders, use different things in order to stop bleeding. They use belts, they use shirts, and lives were saved. And that began the whole idea of having the ability of anyone being able to respond quickly.
Everybody experiences some kind of trauma, and whether it happens to you or someone that you know or a stranger, but in your life you're going to see someone have a traumatic event.
Whether I'm teaching it to a police officer or I'm teaching it to a civilian, it's the same idea. If I can go ahead and get that first person through that first 5 minutes, I've greatly increased their chance of survival.
The people that are the closest to the scene of an event, they become critical because they are there. And we call them the immediate responders. They happen to be at the scene when it happens. And if you wait for the trained people to come, sometimes it could mean life and death.
Even if you don't have a glove, if you see somebody squirting blood, reach in there, put your hand on it, stop the bleeding, then take care of everything else. Even if it's dirty, we can always treat them with antibiotics if they live. But if you don't stop the bleeding and they're dead, then it don't matter.
There were people coming to our aid from the parking lot, from inside the store, and they didn't know, those people coming out, there wasn't a second shooter. What they knew was that they had to help somebody, and they came to our aid despite the potential danger to themselves.
I always tell people, keep a first aid kit on you, If you can't keep it on you, keep it in your bag. Most definitely have one in your house and have one in your car.
I can tell you that the people who work for our organization, every one of us have a first aid kit in our car. We have become first responders.
I mean, we've got crazy school shootings. You got people driving, buses through crowds and hurting people.
Unfortunately, these mass shootings are occurring with such regularity now that more and more people are aware that they have to have emergency response effort.
We all have the choice to remain bystanders or become immediate responders. Each of us must decide what we would do in a catastrophe when a loved one or even a stranger's life may hang in the balance.
There's a saying in Hebrew that if you save one life, it's like you save the whole world. And I feel that we have saved a few lives with what we've done, and that makes everything worthwhile.
What would you do